So next up, we'll hear from Sarah Beach on status of Lake Ontario Lake Whitefish.
Okay, we're good. Hi everyone. So I will be speaking to the status of Lake Whitefish today. First of all, I'll acknowledge lots of folks provided data and insight for the talk today, so thanks to the people listed there. So the fish community objective for Lake Whitefish is to increase abundance in northeastern waters and reestablish historic spawning populations in other areas. And so the trend or indicator for that is increasing populations of whitefish across a range of age groups, sufficient to maintain self-sustaining populations, and again, increasing spawning populations in the Bay of Quinte and eastern Lake Ontario. So for the previous reporting period, our status did not meet with a not changing trend. So before I jump into the current reporting period, I'll provide a bit of a historical context. Most of you will be pretty familiar with this. This graph shows catch per gillnet in Canadian waters of the Eastern Basin. So historically, there was a large decline in the 50s, 60s attributed to overexploitation and habitat degradation. But there was this resurgence in the 80s through the early 90s before a second kind of large decline occurred after the invasion of dracaenid mussels and loss of diaprized species from the lake, from most of the lake. So whitefish, the population responded in a number of different ways, so things like decreased body condition and growth rate. But for the past couple of decades, the population has been at these low abundances. So currently there is two major spawning populations that have persisted. So the first is in the Bay of Quinte, which I'll call the base spawning group, and then the other is off the south shore of Prince Edward County there, which I'll call the lake spawning group. So there is evidence of small numbers of fish spawning in Chameau Bay, thanks to lots of work by folks at USGS, US Fish and Wildlife, but they've emphasized that those numbers are pretty low. So, jumping back to the indicator, we are looking for increases in abundance in northeastern waters, so Bay of Quinte and eastern Lake Ontario, as well as reestablishing historic spawning populations in other areas. So, to look at abundance, I'll focus on two programs today. The first is this lake-wide lake trout gill netting program, which are these sites here, a collaborative effort between the three agencies, M&R coming in periodically. And then the second is the M&R's Community Index Gill Netting Program, so I've subsetted a couple sites here in the Bay of Quinte and kind of the eastern end of the lake. So to start, I'll focus on this kind of eastern end of Lake Ontario piece. Folks who are familiar know that the eastern basin is kind of separated by the Duckweed Ridge, but I'm focusing on kind of this broader eastern end, so these three blue-colored sites here. And I guess just to point out, both these programs happen kind of in summer, late summer, and although they're not exactly the same methodology, they're similar, so we're just kind of looking at general trends here. So here I've plotted three different sites in the eastern end of the lake. This is catch per gillnet through time. The red line is indicating the two different reporting periods. And so for the Bay of Quinte, if we compare the catch between reporting periods, there's a slight decrease. And then comparatively in the eastern waters for both Ontario and New York, there's a slight increase in catch. However, I'll emphasize the y-axis scale here. Catches are quite low in general, so in most years it's anywhere from 0 to 0.6 whitefish per gillnet. So although we see some slight differences, overall catches are still quite low. So another piece of the indicator is increasing the population across a range of age groups sufficient to maintain self-sustaining populations. So I just wanted to highlight quickly the age structure of those two main spawning groups that have persisted. So this data comes from the M&R's fall commercial catch sampling program, where we subsample some of the commercial harvest. And so the data here that you're seeing is the proportion of the catch of different age groups. So the green is younger fish, 3 to 6 years old, and then going up to 32 years old in the purple there. So the lake groups on the left, the bay groups on the right. And so overall, there's no major changes that we're seeing in the age structure between the reporting periods. There is obviously annual variability there, particularly in those younger age classes. So we do see kind of that consistent recruitment of some younger fish, so some evidence that, I mean, the population is self-sustaining, but as I highlighted in the previous slide, abundances are low, and so we're not seeing an increasing population by any means. So if we want to look a little bit more specifically at recruitment, the M&R's bottom trawl program can catch these young of year age 0 whitefish and provide an index of recruitment for the bay spawning group and the lake spawning group. So the black is the Bay of Quinte site, and the blue is the Lake Ontario site, kind of out near Timber Island by the county there. And so if you look at the top right hand corner, it's kind of the zoomed out time scale, and so overall recruitment levels are much lower than what we saw historically. But looking at the two reporting periods, differentiated by the red line there, catches vary year to year with year class strength. And I've added some horizontal lines there just to highlight the average catch per reporting period. So there's slight increases in average catch of YY, but overall it's really low, and it varies quite a bit. So then I'll jump to the next piece of the indicator, which is looking for reestablishment of historic spawning populations in other areas, so outside of those eastern waters. And before I do that, I want to just highlight what we currently know about the spatial distribution of those two main spawning populations. So this is work that I did as part of my master's with Dr. Bruce Tufts at Queen's University in partnership with M&R. And so for this project, fish were tagged from both the bay and the lake spawning groups. And there's kind of a lot going on in these graphs, but essentially on the left is the bay group and the right is the lake group across 4 seasons. The size of the dots are showing the proportion of detections, and then the lines are directional movements between areas. So the main takeaways were really that the groups, the main areas used by each group were different for most of the year. So the bay group really utilized the Bay of Quinte and kind of the Canadian waters of the eastern basin, whereas the lake really used this Duckaloo Ridge area and over towards Henderson there. There was overlap that occurred, so predominantly in this kind of Kingston Basin area during August. So there wasn't much evidence of distribution outside of the eastern kind of end of the lake, although there weren't many receivers elsewhere. We did have one fish that was detected moving all the way down to the mouth of the Niagara River, where it stayed there for the summer and then moved back to the eastern basin in August. And so Dr. Tim Johnson and his group are continuing telemetry work on the lake spawning group. They've found somewhat similar things. Emma Bloomfield's going to talk to you more about this after me, so stay tuned. But just highlighting that they also had some evidence of a couple fish moving down along that south shore. So overall, I just want to highlight this and keep it in mind for the next couple slides. So if we're looking for spawning populations outside eastern waters, we can look at general abundance and catches in some of our assessment programs. So here I'm looking at the wide lake trout gill netting program. So these are catches. I apologize, my colors are mixed up based on the map, but this light pink line is showing you south shore catches. And you'll see there's only one dot for the north shore. M&R just participated last year in 2024 for the first time since 2008, so that was exciting. But if we look at the south shore trend, as you can see, catch is really, really low, like under 0.1 catch per gill net in both reporting periods. So not much evidence here, but as you can see from the telemetry work, it's unclear if these adult fish that are outside the eastern kind of end of the lake, are they from different spawning populations, or are they simply just those eastern end fish that are straying in the summer to other areas? So we can try to look a little bit more closely for evidence of spawning by looking at younger life stages. So here, this is data from the spring and fall lake-wide bottom trawling program that Jer talked about. So here, on the left you have the previous reporting period, on the right you have the current reporting period. This is catches of young of year and age 1 whitefish. The blue is the fall program and the yellow is the spring. So we saw in the previous reporting period some of these younger fish down around Oswego and then a couple out towards Hamilton Harbor. We don't see any catches in the current reporting period kind of outside of the eastern end of the lake. So not much evidence here for spawning occurring outside of eastern waters. There might be, but is it a reestablished spawning population? Likely not. And so the last piece I'll highlight is the larval detection work that was done by Taylor Brown and all, where they conducted larval tows throughout the lake. And so this plot highlights where larval whitefish were caught. You can see there's kind of 2 little points on the south shore, but otherwise it was all really distributed in the eastern basin. So again, not much evidence there for spawning populations in other areas. So to sum up, in terms of increasing abundance in the eastern end of the lake and reestablishing historic spawning populations in other areas, our status is not meeting for the current period with a not changing or stable trend. I think that's it. Thanks.